a is written by itself, or any variable when it's written by itself, there's actually a number that is in front of it. What is it? A 1. Okay, so this and this are the same thing. Okay. Also, there's an exponent that is there, which would be a what? A 1, right? We just don't write it just because we know when variables are by themselves, there's a 1 in front of it, and there's a 1 as an exponent, but it really doesn't change the value of that. Okay, so we just don't, I'm just starting you out basic because there's going to be some things we need to know about that 1. Okay, a to the 0 means that there is no a. Okay, so when a is gone, what is still there? A 1. Okay, so anytime, regardless of what this letter or number is, the answer is always 1. Okay, because that's why that 1 was there and we forget about it. Everybody just thinks, oh, it's 0. You know, well, the a goes away, so there's no longer an a, but there's still a value there, which is a 1. Okay, everybody remember what happens when we have negative exponents? Remember? Kind of, yes. So it's not proper unless you have scientific notation to have a negative exponent. Okay, so to make it proper, it needs to be positive. So the only time when you have scientific notation, the negative tells you which direction to move your decimal. Okay, we're not doing scientific notation. So to make it positive, if it's at the top, you bring it down to the bottom of a fraction. If it's at the bottom of a fraction and it's negative, then you just switch it up to the top. So moving from top to bottom switches it from a positive to a negative. Okay? So to rewrite this, this means the same thing as 1, because remember the 1 is still there, but now moving this down to the bottom will change it just to a or a to the 1. You don't have to put a 1 there. Okay, so I'm going to rewrite this just as this, because that means the same thing. So moving from the top of a fraction down to the bottom will switch the exponent sign. Okay, good. Okay, so now we're moving away from variables and going to numbers. Okay, so just like this one, where there was a 1 here, okay, we still have 1 times 2, okay, and we can have a 1 there. That means the same thing. Okay, we only write 1, 1. Okay, so when I go to write this one, it's a 1 times 2 times 2, because there's 2 of them. And that's what the exponent means, is you're multiplying that same number out that time. Okay, so what do you think 1 or 2 to the third is going to be? Looking at the pattern. 2 times 2. Right, and 3. Okay, so now what's going to be there?
0.
Oh, wait.
Wait for which one?
1/2.
Close. So when it's 2 to the 0, is there a 2?
Oh, so
It's just 1. Right. So that means there's no 2's. Like here we have 3 of them because it says there's 3. Well, if there's no 2's, the answer is still going to be a 1. So remember when I said up here, regardless of what is here, if it's a variable or it's a number or a fraction, okay, the answer is just always going to be 1. Okay. And we don't write 1 times. We usually just go, well, it's 2 times 2 times 2 and forget about the 1. So that's where that comes from. Okay. So going on to the next one. Let's write a couple of those and then. At least write the fraction ones. Maybe leave these below and then I'll screw it up. So we'll practice the fractions. Okay, so when you have a fraction, the other ones we had whole numbers or negative numbers, but we didn't have any fractions on that first page. So when you have fractions, this actually means you're taking either the square root or the cube root or the fourth root. Okay, so you're going to want your square root button on your calculator. Okay, so this rewritten is this, taking the square root of a, or whatever is out front, square root. So if that was a 4 to the 1/2, okay, that means whatever I had here, I put inside the square root, which would be what? 2. Okay, so this just means this part, so squaring it or cubing it if it's a to the third. Good? Okay, so this next one, the bottom number is the square root thing, but it's not square root this time, it's going to be cube root. Okay, so I'm going to write we're just dealing with that part right there. Okay, so this is a to the third power, or cube root of a. Okay. Good. Okay, then whatever that ends up giving you, okay, after that, then the second step is going to look like this. I'm just running around with it. So we still have this because we couldn't solve it. But then the second part is now squaring it. Okay, so if we did have a, say it was 8, and we're finding the cubed root of 8, not the square root of 8. We're finding what number times itself 3 times would give me 8. 2. So that means that simplified would make this 2. And then I would take 2 to the second power, so 2 times 2, and that would be your final answer. Okay? So you do the bottom part first, okay, which is the cube root part. And then after you solve that, then you're going to go to the second power. Okay, so we're trying it. Okay, that one right there. So the first step, and I'm just showing the steps. So I have 8 that I'm putting inside it instead of a variable like what we had here. And I'm finding the cube root of that. And we just said that was what? 2. Okay, so now I have 2 as an answer, but then I'm taking this, whatever that number happens to be, and I'm putting it out here, which was a 2. So 2 to the second power would make it 4. Okay, so process is to do the bottom one first, and then go to the top one. The bottom one is cube root, square root, fourth root, whatever that bottom number happens to be. Okay, we good? Okay, so those are the fraction ones. So I'm going to scoot down here on these ones. So now we have multiplication and division. Okay, so on this is review, okay, because we've done this in previous years. When I distribute this, what does that become? X to the third. Okay, so this has an exponent as a 1, and this one has an exponent as a 2. So you're not actually multiplying your exponents, you're what? Adding them. So keep that in mind. Okay, so then when I do that to here, this is an x to the 1, x to the 1, so that becomes x to the second, right? So we don't write a 1 here, we don't write a 1 there, we just know that there's 1s there, just like the previous page. Okay, so same thing here, when the bases are the same, so our bases are the same, you don't do anything with the bases, you just add the exponents, right? So if I had 2 times 2, we know that's what? 4. But really what this is 2 has a 1 as an exponent, right? And we're adding these. Okay, so this would be 2 to the second power, which you just already said that, which is 2 to the second power is going to be 4. So we're remembering whatever these exponents are when we're multiplying, we add our exponents. Okay. Okay. So now this is a power to a power. This doesn't have just like this. This has power to a power. So whatever is in this parentheses, it means that it is written 3 times. Okay? So this is 2 to the third times 2 to the third times 2 to the third. Okay, now I'm at timesing. What did you say when we times, we do what with the exponents? Add them. So 3 plus 3 would be 6, plus 3 would be 9. Okay, so this would be 2 to the 9. Okay, this is the long route. Okay, so this, whatever's in the parentheses, is taken to the third power, so it's times itself. We just said times, we add. Okay, so what can I do with these two to get that answer? Multiply. So if you notice it's a power to a power, just multiply those two numbers. That's the quickest way to do it. Okay, and that's where that comes from. The multiply is the same as adding those 3's. Okay. So what did I say happens to exponents when you move them up or down? They switch from positive to a negative. Okay, so I'm going to show you 2 routes on this. You choose whatever one is easiest for you to remember how to do. Okay, we're only combining like terms. I'm just going to push this up. Okay, we're only combining like terms. So on this one, I'm going to move them all up to the top. Okay, I'm going to move this up to the top, so that means I've got x to the second. When I move this up to the top, it's no longer multiplication or division, it becomes multiplication. but it'll change to a negative 4. Okay? And I'm just grouping them together when I move them up. Okay, I'm going to leave that one alone, but it's all multiplication because they're just written next to each other. Okay, but I'm going to move this up to the top, so it's going to change it to a negative 2. Okay, so we're at multiplication. When we multiply, we do what with the exponents? Add them. Okay, so when we have multiplication, we're going to add the exponents, but we're not adding because one of them is a negative. Okay, so if I were to add 2 plus a negative 4, that would make it a negative 2. Okay, if I'm adding these, that means my y would be what? 4. Okay, so this is right, it's just not simplified because you shouldn't have a negative exponent. So to make my x into a positive exponent, I would move it where? To the bottom. Okay, so final answer would be y to the 4th and x to the 2nd. Okay, so that's one way. Just move everything up, switch the signs, and then combine your like terms. Okay. The other way, so you don't have to do that switching, okay, is to go back to this original. Okay, so I'm just going to write this x to the 2nd, y to the 6th, x to the 4th, y to the 2nd. Is to avoid having negatives, because that's the extra step of having to move it to make it back to a positive. So I know I'm combining my x's, so I want to move the smaller to the larger. Because if I move the smaller to the larger, then I'll wind up with a positive exponent. Okay, so of my x's, which one is the smaller one? The 2, right? So if I move that one down, okay, it's going to change to a negative 2, right? Okay, so that would make it x to the 2nd. Okay, and move down to the bottom. Of my y's, which one is the smaller one? The bottom one, right? So when I move it up to the top, it switches to a negative. So that would make it y to the 4. Okay. So you can remember that one. I think that one's easier because now they're already where they're supposed to be. I moved it up to the top, so it stays at the top because it's, and you're just subtracting because it moves from a positive to a negative. Okay, so these were not the problems that were on the worksheet. This is review. So now we're going to try the actual problems that are on there and apply these to see if we can remember all of that. Okay, starting out easy, order of operations. So order of operations, we got to do exponents before we can multiply. Okay, so 2 to the 2nd power is going to be 4. 6, it's not changing, right? It's going to stay as 6. 8 to the 0, 1. Okay, so now we can multiply. So just 4 times 6, basically, which is going to be good. Okay, so the common mistake, and I'm not joking, it's probably like one of the most missed things on the state test, is people put 0 here because they just think, well, 0, it means there's nothing there, and they put a 0 there, and anything times 0 is 0, so that's what they put as their answer. And not joking. So just hopefully we can remember that. Okay. So the next one, we have an exponent. So it means whatever's in that parentheses, it's being times by itself, whatever the exponent is. Okay? So that means that this 4 is to the 2nd power, and the 5 is to the 2nd power. Okay, right? So 4 to the 2nd power, so 4 times 4 would make it 16, and then 5 times 5 would make it 25. Done. Good. We're starting out on the easy ones. Okay. Now we got fractions. Okay, so remember the first step was to do the bottom part of the fraction. Okay, it's not square root, it's going to be cube root. So that's going to be my first step. Okay, so in your calculators, they should have, I think these do. Try this one just to see if what'd you say? It's 5, yeah. Yours has it. This one has one with an X. I just want to try this.
Oh, power, yeah.
Oh yeah, it does. Okay, so when you use it on this one, when you're using this one, it's down here where the zero's at. You just have to hit the shift key to get to the green, because up above it says cube root. So I would put in 125, and then the green button, and then hit the 0, and that's the cube root. Okay. Phones, I think you can turn it sideways, and it'll have a 3. It's not the square root, it's the cube root. Okay, so we already know that one. So that's the first step, is to do that part. So that was, what'd you say? 5. Okay, so now I have 5 that is going to the negative 4th power. I don't want a negative exponent. So to make it positive, I'm going to put it down at the denominator. Okay, so this is now 1 over 5 to the 4th power. I just made it positive. Okay, so now I'm just taking 5 times 5 times 5 times 5. So 4 going out, which is x. Okay, so it's the bottom number first. So whatever that is. Okay, you will, I think there's some that have 5 as the bottom number. So you could take the cube root first and then the square root, because 5 and the 2 would make, or the 3 and the 2 would make the 5th root. But most of it will be square root or cube root. So you do that part first, and then take the exponent, the top. Good? Good. I need a nod from Chloe. Cannot survive. Okay. That's why she's at the front. We just need a nod from somebody up front. Okay, so number 5, we're combining like terms. So remember, this one was the one where I said there's 2 ways to do these ones. So you could just move everything up to the top and then switch the signs of them and combine them, or just look at the bases and move the smaller one to the larger one. So if we do that second one, which I like, preferably because it's shorter, is which one's my smaller one of the 2s? The top one. So when I move it down to the bottom, it switches from a positive to a negative 2. So that means I write my answer down at the bottom. So that would be 2 to the 6. Okay, so of my 3's, this one's the smaller one, right? What is the exponent on that? A 1. Okay, so I move that up, and it switches from a positive to a negative. So that means now I write my answer at the top because I moved it up, and that'd be 3 to the 5th. And on the worksheet, it says leave in the power format. You don't have to multiply it out. Okay, so you don't have to go 3 times 3 to 5 times. Okay, almost done. These aren't too bad. 2 more. So this one and 1 more. Okay, so there's actually 2 ways that you can do this one. There's a longer way and a shorter way. We want to do the shorter way. But when, I just want to see if you can remember that, when it's a power to a power, what do you actually do with those 2 numbers? Multiply. So when you do that, this would be 5 to the 9th, 8 to the 15th, and 3 to the 12th. But then you would also have to do it down here, okay? And then from there, subtract, okay? I like to work with smaller numbers. And sometimes you can get rid of things before you have to do that power. So order of operations is do parentheses first, okay? So we're just going to simplify these just like we did in the last one. Okay, I'm going to move the smaller to the larger. Okay, so that means my 5 is going to be at the bottom. What is my exponent? 2. Good. Okay, 8's. I'm moving my 8 down to the bottom as well. And it's going to be what? 3. Okay. And then my 3 is going to get moved up to the top, and it's going to be 2. Okay, so now I'm just taking those numbers, which are smaller numbers, and multiplying it times 3. And then we're done. Okay, so my exponent, so that means it's going to be 3 to the 6. And this one would be 5 to the 6. And then 8 to the 9. me, that's a lot shorter, okay, than to multiply each and every single one of those and then have to move and subtract. And good? Okay, last one. And this one's actually easier than that one. Okay, remember when it's parentheses, it means everything in there is to that power. So it means that 1 is to the negative third power and the 10 is to the negative third power. But we don't want exponents to be negative. So to make them positive, I would just switch that whole thing, right? So now it's 10 to the third power. Do I even need to write that bottom one? No, because 1 to the third power is just 1 times 1 times 1, which is just going to be 1. Okay, so we just need to simplify that. That would actually multiply that. So 10 times 10 times 10. So majority of them, they'll say leave in exponent format. If it doesn't, then it's because they're smaller numbers. So they have you go ahead and multiply that. It's a lot of cramming. Okay, so I'll get you these and then you can cross off the ones that we've already done. I think some calculators actually do the exponents for you as well. I just don't know the order it goes in without messing with it. Okay, so you're going to want to cross off, because we already did it together, 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, and 9. Okay, so use your notes. I'm good with you moving if you want to like move about, work together. And then we'll grade it at the beginning of class tomorrow before the lesson finishes.